Hi, today I'm going to show you how to use Elementor containers in order to build complex designs such as this one. Elementor containers give us much more flexibility while building the websites. So let's dive in. First, we will switch to the newly created page just to avoid the confusion. And within that page you will probably have the quite similar setup as I have here, probably without just this icon depending on your installed plugins. And your header and footer might be different depending on your design of the website. So first approach to add a new container would be going to this plus sign here, and now you will have two separate options that you can choose. One of them is Flexbox and the other one is Grid. I usually use almost always the Flexbox since it gives us much more flexibility, as its name says. So we will click on Flexbox, and now you will have a multiple different options to choose. First option gives us the vertically aligned container, and the other one gives us the horizontally aligned container. Third option gives us the row container that contains two vertically aligned containers in the 50-50 ratio, and so on. Most of them are just visually represented here, as you can see. You will in most cases use the single one or the double one, or in some cases if you need more columns you will add it like this, since it's much more quicker, but I will show you the slower way just to show you how the containers work in general. So we will go to the first one, and now you have the container. This container actually can contain any of the elements or widgets that you can see here, and you can drag for example the heading to it. You can go here, and then you also can add the widgets by clicking on them, like text widget and for example button widget below. And on the right side you will see the structure of your added widgets or containers. If you don't see this part here called structure, you can enable it or disable it from here, and you can also drag it to the specific place of your page when you are building it, just to avoid covering specific parts of the page. So as you can see here, you can close the container and open it to see what's already in it. Here you can also use the drag and drop to reorder the content within the container, and also here you can right click and duplicate containers to create more of them. In cases when you want to add more columns to the specific container, you can go by clicking here, Flexbox. You can select this option here, and as you can see in the container that's already created and selected, you can see when we click on it, first container has direction row, and it contains two different containers with the column or vertical alignment. Now let's drag and drop some content to it just for testing purposes. For example, when you already choose your content, you have ability to align the content of the container. For example, when you click on the container, each container have the layout, style and advanced tab. Let's go first through those options here. Container layout, for example, you will leave the Flexbox as it is. We will not probably never switch it to the grid, depending on your use case. Content width, for all containers that are contained within the parent container, you will use the full width. But in cases, for example, if you want the parent container to be stretched completely to the left and the right without the white spaces from the sides, you can switch the content width from boxed to full width. And here it is, but for now we will leave it as it is. Below you will have the ability to set the width of the container, which you can reduce, for example, if you need it to be smaller, and increase the one that you want to be larger or similar. Below it you have an option for minimum height. Usually containers height is defined by the content within it, but in some cases if you need container to be larger than its content, you can define it here. Direction, here you can choose which direction the content within the container will be orientated. If we click row horizontal direction, you will see that everything is sorted in a single row, but if we click the column, it will be vertically aligned. We also have the reversed options, for example, to reverse the content from bottom or from the right. but we will leave it as it is. Also here we have the option to justify the content. For example, you have the multiple options. By default it's set to start, which is not selected by default, but it's the option it uses. We have the option for centering content vertically. We have the option for setting the content aligned to the bottom of the container. We have the option to make the space between the widgets within the container. For example, it will align first and the last one to the top and bottom and fill the white space between it with the proportional ratio just to make it spaced between. We have the space around option, which also adds a little bit of space on the top and the bottom, which is actually this space from here divided by 2 and put on top and on bottom, and space evenly, which aligns them all with the same space between all the widgets, even from the top and even from the bottom. We will currently center it just to make it look nicer. Also, we have the option for aligning the items within the container. For example, by default they are all sorted to the start, but we can center them. If the widget width is not full width, as you can see here, you will be able to center it to the column. But in this case, if we want to center the text, we will need to select that widget and go center to the text. We will return to the container settings. Here we also can align it to the ends. We can stretch it to fill the full width of the container. As you can see now, the button widget fills the 100% of the current container compared to the, for example, start or center option. Option gaps. This allows us to make the gap between the widgets within the container. By default, in most Elementor installations it's set to the 20 pixels, but we also can play with it and put different that we want our content to have a gap between, but we also can set it to 0 if we don't need the gap between the content that we already put there. So we will leave it by default. And here we have the option wrap, which has the no wrap and wrap option, which means, for example, if we go to this container and set it to the row, as you can see, it goes outside from the container since the content is wider than the container. In this case, no wrap is by default selected, but if we click wrap, you can see that content aligns vertically even if the column is set to row. But for example, if we put this column width, for example, now to the 80% and set this one to the 20, you can see that content is still vertically aligned. But for example, if we set this container with the text and go to advanced options and set its own width to the custom dimensions and put it to the pixels and set it to 200 pixels, you can see that it's now aligned as the container defines in a row. But if that content gets a little bit larger, for example 400 pixels, you can see that it will automatically start to switch the content that's larger than the container width to the new row. If we select the container again, you can see that we have ability again to align content similarly to before. Now we will remove this container and we will add a new one and go to the flexbox. For example, we will select this one, and in case if you want to add more columns, for example like here, you can just right click on the column and go to duplicate column. And for example, to put 3 columns in a row, you can go like 33% here, 33% here, and 33% here. And as you already probably noticed that we already have a 1% of gap between them, since 3 times 33 is 99 and we are missing 1% to be 100% width. That can be easily solved by the option in the advanced tab and going to grow option to each of the containers within it, and that will fill the gap of 1% between those. In order to build multiple columns, for example, you can go from here and select the 4 columns like this, and we can quickly populate it with the image container, for example, title container, and the description container also. And we also can, for example, in order to duplicate it, we can remove already existing 4 columns and duplicate the existing column 4 times. And as you can see, it's easy like that to duplicate content, create the columns, and even add more columns if you want, for example, by duplicating it even more or duplicating even more and more and more depending on your needs. As you can see, this flexibility can't be reproduced with most of the other page builders on the market, and most of them are quite limited. For example, 1 column, 2 columns, 3 columns, and then like 4, 6, 8 even number of columns without the ability to have, for example, 5 columns, which in most cases reproduced some errors in the responsive view. So it's quite easy to add new columns, remove existing ones. It's pretty much simple as that, and its flexibility is almost limitless comparing to the other page builders. For example, I will show you how to style your containers, which is not possible in most of the other page builders. For example, if we select this container, this specific container and column within this parent container, we will have ability to set the style. For example, we will set the background color to be, for example, yellow. Then we will go to the border. We will set the border radius to be the 20 pixels. Then in advanced, we will make the padding within the column to be like 35 pixels. And when we click off, as you can see, it's quite easy to set the design of the specific columns without making the changes to all the columns if you don't need them to. So that's it. See you in the next video. Bye.